So hello, my name is Brendan Humphreys, and welcome to how Atlassian does software development. Wow, he's done.
On the shoulder and say, you broke the bill.
I am the Scrum Bitch. There's two ways to address that. One is showing what kind of question is that?
Okay. Obviously did something to the mixer of that video. So what we're going to discuss today is exactly what the title of the session is. We're here. I'm here with three other Atlassian developers, and we're going to discuss how we do software development. I'm going to start off the discussion by introducing our developers, but then I really encourage you to ask any questions you have about how we go about software development, or any opinions you have, please share. So next to me here we have Matt Quail. Matt is the lead developer of Fisheye and Crucible in Atlassian. Anything that you don't like about those products, this is the guy to beat up. Next we have Charles Miller. Charles Miller is the dev guru, code poet of Confluence. Charles wrote the first version of the wiki renderer in Confluence. So
Technically, Mike wrote the first version, and then I made it work. So.
And then I went and cleaned it up after you by extracting.
Yeah. Anyway.
And that leads us to Dylan, who is the tech lead of the Jira project.
Something like that.
Yeah, cool. Dylan could be blamed for import-export in Jira and probably a whole bunch of other things.
Sorry.
So I'm going to start off leading the questions with a question to each of our panelists, basically just getting them to introduce themselves and their team and tell us who their favourite superhero is.
Okay, so yep, I'm Matt. I was originally with Senqua before Atlassian bought Senqua, and there I was the originator of Crucible and Senqua, so I wrote most of the original code. And that means I know mostly how it hangs together, so I'm probably for the rest of my life going to be on the Crucible and Fisheye teams. And my favourite superhero, I'd have to go with the Tick. Spoon!
The Tick.
Yep.
Cool. Charles.
So I started working at Atlassian in December of 2003, which is an insanely long time ago now. And I started on the Confluence team when we were just releasing the first beta of Confluence, and have really been there ever since. I had a short digression into project management, which I failed miserably at, and they just sent me back to code again, which is probably one of the better
for everybody.
Yes, it's better for everybody. And I'm going to have to go with the boring choice and say the favourite superhero is Batman, because he doesn't have superpowers, he just makes his own cool shit.
Do you think he's really making that stuff?
Oh, absolutely. He's just sitting
Not contracted
there.
out?
He owns an enterprise that makes
Yeah,
it.
well, something like that. But he has the cool ideas anyway.
My name is Dylan Etkin, and I've worked on the Jira team for the last 4 years. So I've seen it go through an incredible evolution. When I started, Scott Farquhar, one of the co-founders, he basically used to, grab me every 5 minutes and be like, "Oh, I'm committing this code," and we've come a long way since then. I've seen all sorts of major features on that. We've gone from less agile to more agile on Jira, seen lots of things. And I guess my favorite superhero would be Supergirl, right? Because she's just as powerful as Superman, but she's hot.
Yeah, all right, I'll pay that. So in Atlassian we have 12 development teams, 12 software development teams, and They vary in size dramatically. We've got a representation here from 3. So I'm going to get each of our panellists to describe a little bit about what makes their team in Atlassian just a little bit different.
There's probably quite a few things. Let's see. What makes... So my team is both the Crucible and Fisheye project. One of the things that makes us a little strange is that in some... Crucible and Fisheye are sort of siblings or cousins, and it's... In some respects, they have quite different development priorities, and in some ways they have similar ones. So we're probably the most schizophrenic development team at Atlassian, both personally and in terms of project management.
And the Confluence team is, I think, in terms of developers, it's up to about 15 people now. So a couple of months ago, we actually reached the point in the development team where stand-up meetings were taking too long, and we had to break them up, which was a reasonably hard thing to do, because the whole point of stand-up meetings is everyone gets up in the morning and checkpoints with everyone else on the team what's going on, and keeps everyone in the loop as to what's happening. So if you have an idea that somebody else might have input on, they'll know about it. And so it's kind of a sort of a monumental moment where you have too many people to just get through all that in the 5 minutes it should take, and you kind of have to partition the team and break down the communication a little bit. So that's Confluence.
The Jira team is tall, handsome, careful. We like long walks on the beach. No, I'm just kidding. It's actually a team of about the same size as Confluence. We're about 13 developers on the Jira team at the moment. We've got a PM and a team lead as well. We're broken up into little sub-teams. So we have like an engine room team, and then we have a couple of feature teams, and we always have a bug stream going as well. Yeah, we certainly do a lot of pairing, and we try to be as agile as we can.
It's probably worth talking about the engine room team a little bit, because that's another kind of recent addition.
Yeah, it's a new thing for us as well.
And it was, as our products have grown, I mean, as you develop any product, you've got this constant battle between deadlines and wanting to do things properly. And sometimes you pick the deadline over doing things properly, and you accumulate what we refer to, and it's commonly referred to as code debt, which is where you know that you're not doing something the ideal way now, so at some point in the future you have to come back and fix it.
Not to mention, all of our products sort of came from humble beginnings, right? Yeah. So they started out with a very small user base and like a couple of developers doing a lot of code very quickly, right? And then they grew into enterprise products that really found their way, and we have a little bit of that leftover code in some areas,
And it's not even doing things the wrong way. Sometimes you do something exactly the right way for the product you have now, and then you add a few dozen more features to your product, and then suddenly that really nice API you had before suddenly doesn't scale up to what you wanted to do anymore. And so in the last year or so, we've actually instituted specific teams on both Jira and Confluence, and I think it's spreading through the rest of the company as well, whose responsibility is the internal APIs and maintaining those and making sure that as we continue to develop the product in the future, the internal APIs can scale to the kind of features that we want to add. So usually like the engine room team is like a few months ahead of the feature teams in thinking, well, we know that we're going to deliver, a new search in Confluence 2.9. Therefore, throughout the 2.8 development, we were trying to fix up the search APIs so they didn't suck quite so much. So, yeah.
And the reason you have a separate team for that is it's much easier to make sure that work gets scheduled, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like if you just have fixed search API as a line item.
But if you have a team for it, then you know that time's been budgeted towards it. Yeah. If you don't have a team responsible for this, it's just kind of gets lost, because there's always pressure to get this feature done and get this feature done.
No matter how well we plan the big features, right? There's always the what do we call them? The unknown unknowns, right? There's the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns that sometimes have infinite amount of estimation time.
There was a reasonably famous card during Confluence 2.3 which actually had an estimate of infinity.
I think you had 3 at one point.
Yeah, that's right. We put a status report up, and it was we only have 3 infinities to go before we can release 2.3. And I think one of them we never fixed.
Sorry, you have a question?
Yeah, how do you determine which engineers go on these teams, and are certain team more desirable and you rotate through?
My team is the more desirable one. No.
Maybe like engine room team versus a feature team, or do people just naturally select themselves, or do you have to say, well, you're going to do the internal APIs, not the tool?
On the Jira team, people kind of gravitated to where they wanted to be. I think it's a little bit misleading to sort of say engine room because like my team was the JQL team. And I'll tell you, we gutted search in 4.0, right? I mean, we really went after in a very old set of APIs and refreshed that, right? So, I mean, we were doing lots of engine room work. So each team really does get to still go across the spectrum of Jira, right? But I mean, I guess where we get to do a little bit of UI and parser work and that sort of stuff and some JavaScript, the engine room team did more of just back-end stuff.
And
so,
yeah, and it's often, I mean, usually these things are self-selecting. We know we need a certain number of people on this feature, a certain number of people on this feature, a certain number of people on bug fixing, etc. But for the most part, if you're not on the team you want for this release, you can probably get on it the next one. We've got like Agnes on the Confluence team has spent the last 2 major releases dealing with the Confluence rich text editor and is now begging to go on engine room. So that she doesn't have to deal with JavaScript and Selenium tests for a while. So, and
strangely, it just sort of sorted itself out.
Yeah.
And people gravitated into the right place, I think.
But as an interesting counterpoint, there's a lot of loyalty to the product you're working on, and there can be quite a bit of resistance to moving between products, and so people tend to move when they want to move rather than be forced.
We had they implemented some secondments actually for Jira Studio. Like when we were going to launch that, they kind of thought it would be a good idea to get somebody from each one of the products to represent. So I went and did like a 3-month secondment onto Jira Studio, and another one of our team members, Andreas, did like a 6-month secondment. And it was good, you know. I mean, it was good to get out and see something else.
Yeah, we've actually formalised that now into a kind of a secondment program where each team advertises very tightly defined projects that someone can come from another team and spend a very constrained amount of time working on. So maybe a month, maybe 8 weeks. But to date, the uptake of that has not been spectacular. I think we've got, at the moment, maybe 3 or 4 in action at the moment.
I think it's a good thing. I mean, it's a sign, like certainly on the Jira team, we take less 20% time than you would think, like having 20% out there. And often it's because we're in the middle of doing something we're really enjoying. You know, we're doing a feature and like that work is challenging and it's interesting and we're all kind of in that headspace, you know, and like when you think of what would be fun to do today, the answer is that thing that I was doing yesterday, I want to finish it.
I think that's exactly the same on the DevTools teams. Would you agree, Matt?
Yeah, I think we've had one person take 20% time, and I think it's for exactly the same reason. And then you mentioned that in your talk earlier this morning, that a lot of the time you actually do get to do something that's interesting and important in your day-to-day work.
So,
yeah. But I think that if I can sort of, actually no. I was going to say something and I just completely lost it. Yeah.
Okay, so I was just going to say that Confluence and Jira have this concept of the engine room team or sub-team, which in a large way is dealing with code debt. I was just going to throw that question to Matt, who in a sense represents some of our smaller teams, to ask how he goes about that kind of difficult problem.
So the Fisher and Crucible team has only just got big enough that we've actually sort of broken it up into sort of 2 smaller sub-teams. We still are not quite big enough to separate out our stand-ups, so we still have a unified stand-up, but and we haven't broken, and so these two teams are actually very loose, and so it's not designated a particular area. There's not a UI team or an engine room team or a database team or anything like that. It's actually what we do is we sort of divide up the work we want to do into related functional areas, and then both those teams are responsible for all, you know, top to bottom levels of those bits of functionality.
So where does the management of code debt go in that equation? I mean,
what we have. So I'm sort of have the role of architect on that team, and we've got another senior engineer, Connor, who also basically shares that role. And we spend some of our time, only a small percent of our time actually doing refactoring or minimising that technical debt, but we do spend a lot of time identifying it and making other people do it.
Oh, right, putting to-dos in code?
Yeah. No, we've got Jira for that now, so.
So that kind of leads us to code reuse in Atlassian, and this is a bit of a hot button topic. I think you'll find there are very different opinions inside Atlassian about code reuse. Would anyone care to comment on code reuse between teams?
It's one of those things where you do something to save time and spend an awful lot of time doing it. So there's always like this sort of feeling that one product does something and another product does something reasonably similar, so we should be sort of sharing the code that does it. And there are many, many, many benefits to doing that, but you've also got to weigh up the disadvantages, which is suddenly if you find a bug in a particular shared module and you fix it, you suddenly have to negotiate with 4 other products on how the hell they're going to get that as well.
Or like in the old days when you fixed it and suddenly Jira's plugin system wouldn't work anymore.
Yeah, that's kind of the reason why Jira didn't actually upgrade plugins until plugins 2 came out, was because the progress of development on plugins in Confluence, because Confluence was a lot younger when we started adding plugins, and so it could adapt to more things like the dynamically reloadable plugins, which Jira is only like getting in the next version or 2.
Yep.
And so we'd be making lots and lots of changes to this plugin library, and at some point it just stopped being worthwhile for Jira to upgrade because of the amount of work for no benefit, because we're only adding features that would only work in Confluence anyway.
Yeah, and it almost became partitioned as well. There was sort of 2 implementations of the plugin system, and we used this one, and we knew that you never would mess with that any longer.
Yeah.
There was a point at which you just sort of stopped messing with that, so we sort of stayed on that branch.
I think Atlassian is a good case study for reuse in a software organisation, because when I came to Atlassian from Sequel, one of the first things I noticed was there was an obvious passion for reuse, or attempting to reuse things within an organisation. There was all our products obviously didn't use any of the shared Atlassian libraries, and we were constantly saying, well, here's a shared Atlassian library that all the products are using to do this, and it was, yeah. And
did you ever have to use Bucket?
No, so...
Yes, that's good.
What's Bucket?
Yes.
It's not Confluence, is it?
No, it's yes. The life cycle of Bucket is a story. It's when Confluence 1.0 came out. As soon as we released Confluence 1.0, we went through and we looked for stuff that we could pull out and perhaps reuse as the basis for the next Atlassian application. So, there's all sorts of things that you're going to need in every web app. You're going to need, persistence and some way of setting it up and some way of configuring it and a user management system and all that kind of stuff. And we thought it would be really good to take all that stuff that we'd already done in Confluence and take it out and make it kind of an Atlassian base. And the idea was that we would first pull all the code that wasn't specific to being a wiki out into this module that we just called Bucket. And then once we put everything in Bucket, we could then just find common areas of code and say, okay, this is all of our Xwork customizations, these are all of our Hibernate customizations, and then eventually there would be no Bucket left. And the process of getting rid of Bucket took about 4.5 years.
And it's all back in Confluence.
Yes, and we just finally, like a week before Confluence 3.0 came out, Matt Ryle on the Confluence team finally got sick of updating Bucket and took all the code that was in Bucket that was only actually ever used by Confluence anyway and put it back into Confluence.
But on a serious side, in terms of reuse, it's changed a lot since I've worked at Atlassian. Initially it was sort of Atlassian core, and that was everybody used these sort of weird things that were in Atlassian core. And we weren't super good at that reuse, but we've gotten really good at it now. I think especially with plugins too. Jira's 4.0 dashboard is all built as a plugin, and that will go into the other products at some point as a plugin, right? So we've really sort of decided all right, well, let's take this plugins framework and make that the place to sort of make these agnostic little widgets and components that each product will be able to utilize. So we've certainly gotten better.
A lot of that came from the studio team, because the studio team was the first team that actually had to sit down and pull all of our products out of Subversion and build them all at once and have them work together, and then try and add features that worked across 4 different apps. And they sort of quickly ran into problems where they were writing the same feature 4 times. And so the plugins too came from Don Brown, who was working on the studio team at the time. And he also has been building this thing called the shared access layer, which itself is a plugin, But what the shared access layer does, and it's going to be really useful for plugin developers, is provide a uniform way across all the applications to do things that all of the applications do. Like, you know, how do I know if this user is in the system or not? Well, there's actually different APIs in different in the different apps, but Sal just is a layer on top of that. So that's one of the things that the studio team is doing to get around some of the sort of disparities between the apps.
Well, that's probably not a bad time to talk about plugins in general. So as you know, all of our plugins expose quite rich plugin points. I'm just going to poll the developers to my left about some of the challenges and strategies in maintaining and developing a product that is riddled with so many plugin points that some of you plugin developers are really relying on.
So in the Fisheye Crucible team, we took a slightly different direction to the organic direction that had occurred in Confluence and Jira, and we broke out a plugin API separate from our product and tried to baseline that, and plugins authors would write against that API, and our own internal code would be chaotic and rapidly changing, but we would keep that sort of API steady. Whereas I think in the Confluence and Jira teams, at least initially, plugins sort of grew out of saying to plugin developers, look, if you want to do this, just call this. And I think you guys have ended up with a really rich and ecosystem that's grown fast because you've given access to all the things that your product can do, whereas we seem to move a bit slower because we try to come up with an API for all the features we want to expose, and we haven't come up with APIs yet for all these new features we want to expose.
Well, it's one of those things, like, I mean, the plugin system developed through, like, the history of Confluence. Really, what would happen is we would write something, and then a third party would want to customize it or add some new feature to it, and we would, in response, add some plugin point that would enable them to do that. But it would be really, really great if I could go back in time and 5 years ago say we are going to create a stable versioned API that all plugins can use and sort of will be guaranteed not to change between versions, rather than calling all of our apps internal APIs. But if I did that, we wouldn't have a product, because we have spent all our time working on that API and not on adding features, and no one would have bought Confluence, and I wouldn't be sitting here today. So it's one of those things where sometimes you just have to make a trade-off and choose the thing that will actually give you some benefit, rather than just sort of spending a lot of time sort of working on trying to make this really complicated app have a sort of clean exported API.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there. That's probably one of the hardest things in Jira as well. Like, we definitely feel your pain. And I think a running joke for a while there was we hadn't had a release where we hadn't broken a custom field type, and we just sort of shook our heads like every time it would come up, and we're like, fucking hell, we're gonna have to break the custom field type again, and they're gonna hate us, and it's gonna go out, and everybody's gonna have to fix their stuff. But it is a challenge, especially without that sort of SPI layer, like, to sort of, you want to give that new functionality and you want to do it in a way that's going to be beneficial in the end, but you end up breaking these sort of plug-in points. And we're definitely aware of trying not to break them, but then I think we try and skate that fine line of trying to make that judgment call that if we break it, it's going to be better for you in the end, and maybe we don't.
One of the things I'm kind of hoping for in sort of the medium-term future is that as we build sort of REST APIs on top of our products, they can also double as SPIs for plugins, because they'll be able to do anything that you need to do in the application, and we can provide some sort of shortcut, and that will have to be sort of standard in version, so that we can sort of provide APIs that we can point to and say, well, if you use that, then life will be a lot better.
I do think a difficult thing, though, like in the product the size of Jira, is that we just offer so much functionality, and plugins sort of can do whatever they want. Some people have really great ideas that we don't envision, and because our API is so large, there's only certain parts that we'll be exposing via REST. You know what I mean? Like, obviously, it's going to be a long road, but I don't think we're going to be able to separate ourselves anytime soon from allowing everybody to call everything in our API, which is obviously dangerous, because you never know when we're going to break that. we've tried to sort of put in place this system where we'll add a deprecation and then have it in there for two versions and then rip it out. But that's probably only in the last 4 versions or something like that.
So speaking of customers' wishes for products, how do each of the teams deal with the stream of feature requests, bug reports, and the like that are coming in on each product?
We filter them through Anton and Brian. They take all the flack, and we just sort of let the rain fall after that. No, but seriously, it has guided a lot of Jira's product releases for the last few versions. You know, like you have these issues that sort of amass a huge critical mass of votes, right? And then you can see where it's important for customers as well. So I think we try to pay a lot of attention to those issues. But then you got to sort of skirt that line of innovating as well. You know, you can't always just have you know, all your features sort of listening to everything that your customers want, because sometimes, you know, you've got an idea and you know that they want it, but they just don't know it yet.
Yeah. Because generally the kind of feedback you get from sort of issues on Jack and things that are being voted for are sort of things that people have seen elsewhere. Whereas we also want to try and come up with things that people haven't seen yet, but when they see it, they'll go, hey, wow, that's actually really cool. It's a balancing act.
And they can go raise an issue in the other person's issue tracker saying they need that.
Did you have a question?
Is there a business side that, in my company, the business side of Dependency, whatever the current customer is complaining about, so they would resubscribe and they would be less of, you know, we play call it Catchup, and we would have difficulty saying, you know, if we go in this direction, it may be a learning curve, but they'll be, you know, appreciated more long-term. Do you also experience that, or is it more of the company that has longer lifespan understanding that, so it's just a trade-off, or is it you get pressure from...
There's a long thread on our intranet at the moment from one of our product marketing guys about a particular Confluence bug that has been open a very long time and has a lot of votes and that we have not yet got around to fixing. And there's always going to be, even inside the company, there's going to be lots of sort of back and forth over what we need to do. And we're a very open company internally, and everyone has an opinion and everyone voices their opinion quite strongly. And everyone's kind of looking at me right now.
Did they just?
Yeah. No, and our structure is really flat as well. Like, I mean, it's not as flat as it used to be. I mean, it used to be like, you know, hey, Mike, what's this thing? But now, you know, so we have like a really not many tiers. The developers and, you know, some tech leads, but the, you know, that sort of mishes and mashes. And then like the person who's in charge of the product and then the project manager. You know, we're all in the same room and we're all sort of in the same little circle area. So, you know, there's a lot of interaction between those groups.
So there's pressure just daily.
It's the whole thing is the whole thing's a fire hose. Just the amount of it. That's when I was doing the project management. I was basically at some point I became the product manager and project manager and architect for Confluence at the same time, and almost went insane. But the number of different avenues through which people have to give us feedback, issues on Jack, sort of directly calling us up, what's causing support issues most, comments on pages, forums, mailing lists, Twitter. Yeah, I mean, we monitor Twitter 24/7 now to see what people are saying about our products and say, hey, have you tried this? And on top of that, we've got our customer advocate team phoning people up and saying, hey, why haven't you renewed? And so it's just this huge fire hose that has to funnel down into product management and sort of pick what's going to really be the theme for the next release.
But I do think like the theme of your question is kind of, are we playing catch up, or are we sort of taking a more longer view? And Atlassian is probably one of the best places I've ever worked where they do take that longer view. You know, like I've always been told when I'm at Atlassian, like, we're a product company, so we're hoping to release it this time, but if we don't, that's okay because we want it to be good. You know what I mean? Like, that's cool because we're a product company, right? And we can do what's best for our products. And I think all the way from high up, there's this real understanding that if we don't care about our products, like, that will show. You know, if we're just playing catch up, that will show, and it will have a negative effect, so it's worth sort of delaying some of that immediate gratification that we would give to customers for that sort of long-term sustainability. I like it.
And I think our capability to deal with that compromise has really strengthened over the last 1 or 2 years because we've really started to get some strong product managers in, which is something I think we were probably a bit light on before. So those people in those roles are, with people in charge of those roles, instead of sort of everyone chaotically trying to find that balance, I think we're getting that balance more consistently.
And we had this thing, sorry, I'll just, one more thing. We had this thing a year ago where the founders came down the mountain with the stone tablets, which document quite a lot of what you saw announced this morning for Confluence 3 and for Jira 4, the open social stuff and the sort of the profile stuff in Confluence. But balanced against that, we still need to find time to fix PDF export because people didn't like it. So yeah, you're always going to play catch up in a certain extent, but you also need to look ahead.
You have a question?
Yeah, I do. I get a number of customers asking me how they can use Jira to track the same bug in multiple branches. And apart from generally tracking parallel streams of development in any tool is difficult. And usually I say to them, well, okay, so it's a multi-select field for which version.
Sure.
But do you have any other process or approaches that you use internally for making sure if somebody comes to you and says, hey, how many bugs were there in 3.8? How many still open?
I mean, we take the approach that every bug that we fix on our branch gets fixed on trunk as well. So like internally, we don't really have that problem so much. But we do set our fix versions for obviously the first version that went out, and there's an assumption that means every version thereafter has that fix. And on the Jira team, we really do tend to be, I think in Atlassian we're known as the careful guys. I think that's fairly justified because we have a lot of people, and if we put something bad out, it gets known really quickly. So we don't tend to put really, really massive changes in point releases, right? Like architectural changes or like, a 50 change commit.
How many branches do you have running in parallel?
We've got 2. We've got our point release branch and we've got trunk. So we have like 4.0, we have a 4.0 which is trunk, and then we've got our 3.x branch, which we have a few tags on, which obviously are our point releases.
So this would differ. Some of the DevTools teams sometimes run more branches than that. Matt, do you want to?
Well, even in Jira, you sometimes sort of reactivate an old branch if you need to do a point release of something. So there's lots of dead branches. Yeah, exactly.
Security fixes is the main
and that's only really strangely come up lately. Like somehow we just didn't have to do that very often in the past, but we've sort of. We've got a guy on that, like Brad, who he's awesome at like scripting anything, like if he does it once and he hates it, then that means you're going to get a really cool solution to why he doesn't have to do it the second time. So he's got all these great scripts for patching Jira, and they go off and automatically grab the tag and, like apply the patch and give you a diff. And
can we borrow him?
No.
Just to finish off that question, we don't all quite work that way. In my team, we dog food our stuff very regularly, so we'll often push. For Crucible and Fisher, we have got 2 dog food instances internally. One that the whole company uses and one that just our team uses, and we'll push to that. So this is the real Crucible instance that we use day to day to do our code review, and we'll push to that often once or twice a day with new builds to test out something we've been working on. So
do you just build them off of bamboo?
No, we just run ants and build me a new dog food.
You get to use ant.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, it's not fair.
We'll come to that in a moment. But you have a question?
So you have several products, as you said, and somewhat separate teams, and a lot of companies in this instance get pretty balkanized, and they have, our team uses Eclipse, our team uses IDEA, we use Ant, we use Maven.
Okay, sounds like we're going to get there sooner than I thought.
We'll get there now.
Yeah, so the question is, especially given the acquisitions, how have you managed that internally, and how does it affect your ability of people to move between team to team?
Well, a classic example of that is back in the day, we were trying to decide which dependency injection framework to use, and there were 2 major ones out there at the time. There was Pico Container and there was Spring. And the decision was we'll just use one on each product and see what's best. And
we got stuck with Pico.
Jira still uses Pico Confluence still uses Spring. And it does. We were talking earlier about how it's hard how people often will stay attached to the same product. And one of the reasons behind that is that they often differ more than they are similar in a lot of ways.
I don't know if that's the motivation for them staying, though. I think that almost comes just because you sort of, you start to love it a little bit, you know what I mean? Like, you call it Connie. I mean, like, you know, like...
That wasn't my fault. That's all it is. Anyway.
Yeah.
So coming back to your question about tools, each developer is free to use their own IDE of choice, as
long as that's IDEA.
You can use IntelliJ IDEA, and most people do, I would say, but we do have a staunch minority that are using Eclipse. I don't think we've got anyone using anything else.
No.
I must admit, every now and then I fire up Emacs, but I'm kind of old school.
Dylan did his coding test when he came for his own Emacs.
And it almost didn't get me the job.
Perhaps one of the biggest tensions, maybe you could call it, is the Ant Maven debate, which I know it happens in the broader development community a lot, and let me tell you, it happens inside Atlassian a lot. Matt,
most days.
Yeah.
Would you like to comment on that?
Well, I think what we do have is a strong tendency to say, well, when all else fails, teams are free to actually do what they need to do to get the job done. And so in my team, we're using Ant because that's what we were using before. And not only are the other teams in Atlassian using Maven, but there's a lot of build and deployment infrastructure built around Maven. And we want to take part of that. So we deploy artifacts to Maven. And to some extent, that's the only thing that that other people see of us. They don't see how we build the code, they just see our artifacts. So from behind that wall, we can do whatever we want, and we do.
That's Maven 2, by the way.
Yes,
Yeah.
well, that's right. And so there's a Maven 2, Maven 1 build as well.
We've got 3 different products and 3 different build systems just in front of you. We've got Jira's still on Maven 1. Confluence was the first product to move from Maven 1 to Maven 2, and therefore made every single mistake we could possibly make in the process, which, it's an entire book in that somewhere.
So each of you are starting a brand new project, Greenfields project. Which one do you choose?
Well, in Atlassian, I would, disgustingly enough, choose Maven 2, because we have so much infrastructure that, for things like our builds and deployments and producing products and sticking them on the website, we've actually got the infrastructure there working pretty well. And I've never been on any project in my life where the build system did not take up more time than you ever thought possible for a build system to take up. You always think this shouldn't be as hard as it is, but it always is.
You're advocating choosing the product to maximise that amount.
I think the build team is going to move to Maven 2 at some point, because with the dashboards and all these new plugins, we're 1 foot in each world at the moment anyway. Yeah. Right, so we're kind of feeling the pain of Maven 2, but we're not getting all the benefits of Maven 2. Like Charles says, like we have this sort of lab manager thing, which will allow us to test our instances on different app servers and different database combinations, and all of that has been done as Maven 2 integration, right? So it's something that we need to do, but we don't get that.
But at the same time, we don't it's not as if there's even close to a mandate that everything needs to move to Maven 2 as soon as possible.
That's true.
And even if we did, we're actually really basically sluts regarding that technology, because we actually tend to choose and change our minds quite a bit when something better comes along.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Look, I mean, if I was starting Greenfields, I'd have to go investigate Ant Ivy, right? Because I know I don't like Maven 1, and I know I don't like Maven... What's that?
Gradle is a new one? Or
maybe, I mean, I know I don't like Maven 1, I know I don't like Maven 2, and I like Ant, but I can see where for something the size of Jira, it's not reasonable.
But you always like the system you don't use.
Yeah.
I use Ant.
The grass is always greener.
I don't like Maven 2.
But you use it.
So we have a question.
Have you looked at using Ivy to set up something similar to Maven?
We have a bit, because we were in the Ant world, and Ivy does provide equivalent functionality to Maven's dependency analysis, but also it provides a bridge from Ant into the Maven world. But we found we could just cross that bridge without pulling in Ivy, so we never actually used it. And because we've just got so much of these artifacts in proper Maven repositories with proper Maven POMs and stuff, Ivy just sort of didn't sell itself above the sort of Maven Ant task kind of level of thing.
So Matt, just on that topic, you mentioned before that as an Ant-based project, you're pushing artifacts to the repository, but it's also true that we're pulling an awful lot out of the repository that are dependencies for Fisheye and Crucible. Do you want to give us a rundown of how you manage that?
So we do it quite differently to how you would think about it in a normal Maven world. We have a POM that describes all our dependencies, and we have POMs that describe all our artifacts. But when we change our dependency POM, we run it and pull that in and all those jars, and then checked into version control. And then we're just in a normal out world with the jars just sitting in a subdirectory right there. And then when we want to deploy something, we just do a normal ant build, and then there's an ant target that'll look at the artifact POM and then publish that. So we really do sort of sit behind a Chinese wall, and from the outside you almost couldn't tell that we weren't a Maven project because we pull dependencies in and publish them. But
except that we do our own builds,
and our bandwidth costs are a lot less.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I found using Maven, and the fact that it can automatically resolve dependencies and transitive dependencies, is that you suddenly have to be a lot more careful about pulling in dependencies just because that you happen to need like 1 or 2 classes in them. It becomes so easy to like add another thing to your POM and say, okay, I can depend on Apache Commons, whatever, and suddenly you've got a 50 meg webinflib directory, and wondering where that all came from.
I can remember almost the point, I can't remember what month it was, but there was basically a month where I realised that most of the open source projects had just moved to Maven. Because before we were using Maven to pull in our dependencies, if we wanted to update a dependency, we'd download the zip, unzip it, and replace some jars, and we'd say, oh, that's a duplicate jar, we'll remove that old version. And I used to do that, so I was quite manually aware of all our dependencies and what depended on what. And then I noticed that a couple of projects, open source projects, became Maven projects, and then a month after that, the number of transient dependencies that project had blew up because they said, oh, it's so easy now to pull in a dependency that I'll just do that now. And then normally you wouldn't maybe notice it with a Maven build, but I said, well, this project that used to be 1 jar is now 14. And
I remember a very similar experience. The very first thing we had to do moving from Senqua to Atlassian was integrate the Atlassian licensing code into our products. And I pulled in this one innocuous jar that was like 1 meg, and it had some dependencies into some other Atlassian jars. And before you knew it, I think I had nearly 25 meg of bytecode just to handle our licensing.
It's probably taken us about 2 years to get those transitive dependencies right on our shared libraries.
Yeah.
I once fired up Confluence, and it wouldn't start up, and it turned out it was because it was trying to use WebWork 1, which is Jira's dependency.
Yeah, we had that problem. I think at one point we may have actually got the Jira jar in there as well.
Yeah.
We didn't release that.
So we have a question in the back of the room.
Yeah, what are you using for Maven repository management in-house? Because the problem I found is I really like Maven, it solves a lot of problems, but I don't like the repository software.
We use Archiva, and we have a committer on Archiva.
we have basically Maven team.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that we don't love it either, and it has a real problem with concurrent publishing, and so a lot of our Bamboo instances suffer from that, like they sort of clobber the jar.
But those guys that have set that up have really thought about how we manage artifacts at Atlassian, because I don't know, it's probably not even a unique situation. We have obviously a whole lot of internal artifacts. We have artifacts that are public, so that's 2 repositories right there, and then we've got sort of third-party repositories, and we do mirroring, archive and mirroring, so that we have an internal mirror in the Sydney office, so that when we're downloading the internet, it's only a local internet. But if you take your laptop home, you don't want to be referencing that internal LAN machine, so we've got DNS infrastructure, so that a DNS address that resolves to an internal machine in Sydney was actually a public machine when you're outside of the Sydney office. So we've invested a lot of time into designing what we want out of our artifact repositories and then implementing that.
Yeah.
I think that's why we'll end up on Maven 2, and at some point you will.
Yeah,
well.
there's every reason to leverage all the work we've done.
Yeah, I mean, we put this into place because when you're trying to download the internet from a whole bunch of random bits of the internet, lots of different repositories, and they're all sort of different lag and all that kind of stuff, eventually something is going to break and hurt you. And so we've put these Archiva instances in place, and we have James DeMay, who's actually committing to Archiva and fixing things, and we're sort of also investigating whatever the other one is that I can never remember. But we're testing Nexus at the moment to see if we want to switch to it, just because everyone else is, and we want to be on the project that's getting the most attention from people who are fixing bugs.
So, sorry, another question?
Slightly different topic. How do you guys handle sustaining of existing products? For example, fixing bugs that need to be fixed in a short time period versus, say, some of the longer term things for future generations?
So I think most of the teams we'll use branches. So we'll use a trunk branch for our sort of next big release, and we'll have this maintenance branch, which for the most part doesn't get worked on unless there's a bug that needs to be rolled into the next point release. So we have those two areas of our code base, and most of the teams will have a bug fix team that they're committed to fixing, there's committed to another point release, and it's going to contain the bugs fixed so far and all these other bugs. And that's a team that alongside like the engine room team and the UI team is working on that branch, fixing those bugs.
Our bug master has two filters. He has the bug hunt now and bug hunt hard. Yeah, and bug hunt hard are those ones that we know we don't really want to fix it on the point release because it's gonna take it's those bugs that unfortunately you guys probably would love us to fix and we haven't. And the reason we haven't is because we know that it's a lot of time and investment and that it's not affecting too many people, and it sort of just rolls from version.x to version.x to version.x.
I'm thinking more, I guess, along the lines of the teams themselves. So, for example, if you have a dedicated bug fixing team,
Right.
are those people always trying to get out of the bug fixing team?
On Jira, what we've done is this guy Brad, he's a brave soul, said he would do the bug master role for 4.0. So he's going to do that, and he's going to stay consistently for the entire release. And then what we do is we rotate. So I have a team of 4 developers, including myself, and I will always have one of those people gone, right? Either to support or to bugs. And we do 2-week rotations onto support and bugs. So we can always have one paired team and one individual team on the JQL team.
We used to do the same thing where you would actually rotate people through the bug fix team a lot more frequently than rotating them through sort of feature teams. But for the last release, we just had one bug fix team that did all the bug fixing for the 2.10.x branch, and that worked pretty well. And really, the only upshot of that was that people on the bug fix team pretty much got first choice of what they wanted to do next version.
I think the thing that made that sustainable too was that your release was 3 months, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Jira 4 has been like a 6 to 8 month type thing, or maybe even longer.
So on our team, we don't have a bug fix team. What tends to happen is in the sort of trunk feature development, obviously if there are bugs that are too complicated and require too big a refactor to fix on the maintenance branch, they'll get assigned to one of our now 2 teams, and then it's just done at the same priority as normal feature work. And then bugs that need to be sort of fixed and then shipped to customers that have it on this maintenance branch, it's usually, most of the people in our teams know how most of the parts of the system work, but there's always experts that wrote that code originally or something like that. And it's usually their responsibility if something's broken they'll usually get assigned the task of going and fixing that.
So I think we're going to have to wrap. Do we have time for one more question? Squeeze one more in. Quick question at the back.
Yes, I just wanted to hear more about your testing practice, DVD and stuff like that.
Okay, 25 seconds. Questions?
We used to test less, now we test lots.
Yeah. One of the hardest things in early Confluence development was coming up with a good framework for our functional tests, and we tried lots of different things before we just focused on writing JWeb unit tests that talk directly to the web API. We probably focus a lot more on functional tests, what XP would call acceptance tests, than we do on unit tests.
What's your code coverage like, Charles?
It's quite good if you ignore certain parts of the app.
We don't. We make sure that we write code nowadays that won't have less than, I think it was like 88% coverage.
Yeah, I mean we've all got
We use Clover.
we've all got Clover built in Bamboo now. 2 product plugs in one sentence. Awesome. We all got Clover built in Bamboo now, and graphing our code coverage and making sure that it at least increases over time. I mean we've got a lot of tests. I mean our functional test suite takes half an hour just to run against one app server and one
Ours
database.
takes 3.
Wow.
We have a lot of tests.
Now Jira's just slow.
No,
I think we have to wrap it up there, folks. Sorry
Okay.
to interrupt. Please take the time to fill in a survey. I think Ken's got them at the door. And also feel free to come and hassle the individuals up here if you have further questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening, guys.